Welcome into a new edition of the Going Deep Buffalo Show on the Built-in Buffalo Network. I'm Kevin. That's Kevin. And we're here to break down yet another Bills victory, 2 in a row now. A couple of Bills winning stretches and another matchup against a top team in a lot of ways. We'll go through some of those metrics toward the end of the show. We'll break down Seattle. The Bills did have a nice victory a couple of days ago. We'll talk about that for a little while. What we saw from the Tennessee, what we saw from Amari Cooper, what we see from in general. Could there be any more Bills trade targets? Possibly. Brandon Beane does not seem to be done. Seems to be an all-in type of year. The rest of the league made a few moves today. We had the Bills opponent actually go out and get a fairly decent middle linebacker from the team the Bills just played. Has to be the first time ever where a player has transitioned rosters and played the same opponent and suited up for both games. It's got to be close to a first-timer as far as suiting up. Suiting up in general, assists play the same team is weird enough, but playing them on different teams in back-to-back weeks, actually being active is another story. So we got a bunch of storylines from you to discuss. But as always, this show is brought to you by some of our best sponsors that we have, the Summit Center, for some of the best autism care in Western New York. Get out there, check out the Summit Center.
And tonight's show is also brought to you by Dave Dengler and the Larson Timko Funeral Home in Fredonia. Larson Timko Funeral Home offering 100% fully guaranteed price and pre-arranged funeral plans with live streaming available. You can give them a call at 716-679-9000 or visit their website at larsontimkofuneralhome.com.
There you have it. So, Kevin, first and foremost, we're going to break down the Titans game for a little bit. I know by the time we come on air, you're talking about 3 days later. We'll give our high level thoughts, after having some time to look at the numbers, dissect it. How good did the team actually play? Not as much of a fire drill as the first quarter may have set out to be, and how good analytically the Bills. I'll get into some of those numbers as well, what the Bills were able to do in the second half against the Titans. Some of those things are shocking, what Sean McDermott and Bobby Babbitt Jr. were able to adapt and do. Some big changes that they had coming out of halftime. It's why I continue to say Sean McDermott is toward the top of the list in what he can do out of halftime. One of the best scoring differentials in the league in the third quarter. That's how you win football games. The Bills are doing it. And the emergence of Amari Cooper, what he was able to do with just 33% of the snaps is going to be impressive. And I'm hoping for somewhat of a full workload this week. But we'll start there. What were your initial thoughts of Amari Cooper after we were on air talking about, the possibility of him last week? So talk to me a little bit about it. And then we had our guest on, obviously. What did you think that Amari Cooper was able to do? We had some people very close to guessing his exact scoreline, which I thought was interesting. But what are your initial reactions from the Bills' acquisition of Cooper and what he was able to do opening up Keon Coleman opening up him? There's definitely evidence on film of what of Amari Cooper was able to do for the rest of the offense once he got going.
Yeah, I think that's where I was going to start with it, because I think Cooper did exactly what we intended him to do, and that was kind of settle everyone else into those more suited roles that they had. Right? Like Coleman didn't have to be the wide receiver one this past week, and he didn't have to be guarded by opposing CB1s. That took the pressure off of him. So when these DBs are saying, oh man, we got to watch out for Amari Cooper now, well, all of a sudden you have Keon Coleman popping off and getting all these yards after the catch, a career high 4 catches for 125 yards. He had that touchdown that was called back, but he really had his coming out party. And I think that was in large part due to Amari Cooper's arrival.
For sure. And I mean, look, I thought that was a touchdown. I was at the game, so I got to see some of the on-field stuff and see the game from a different visual. My vantage point's pretty good at the game. I can see a lot of what's developing, what's on the field. And that just looked like I just didn't see enough to especially call the touchdown. I know the ball moved a little bit. I would have liked to see that call a touchdown. I thought it was ticky-tacky to take that away. Did you see it differently, Kevin, or did you think that was a touchdown for Keon Coleman?
Real quick, I need to say, I'm mad that I didn't text you because I forgot you were going, and I think I passed right in front of your tailgate because I saw the picture that you guys posted afterwards. Yeah, and I was like, wait a sec, I think I walked right by him because I was going from a couple different tailgates, and then I was like, yep, that was like right in the middle of where I was headed. So
yeah, where we are is like an vantage point. People walk right by us to go in the game because we're right by the gates. So I think it's pretty.
I went from lot 6 to lot 4, so I had to cross Abbott Road.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was your row or the next row, but I was definitely in your vicinity, and I think it was your wife who posted it afterwards. And I was like, "Damn, I should have texted you. I forgot you were there."
Yeah. I did. We like to choose one. It was a great day. Sunny. I mean, I definitely think the sun had a factor in the game, especially early on. It was obnoxiously sunny. It was very bright on the field. It was almost like it was lit up. So it made it an interesting day game, especially early on, from Amari Cooper, who's probably not used to the field. His teammates, the ball that Josh throws, had that early third down drop that did probably the Bills score on that drive. I love the ability to take the ball against a team that you don't know what they're going to do with their new quarterback. Not that Mason Rudolph's any good, but you want to get up ahead and press the issue. I know the results. We're going to play the results, and that's not going to be great. But I do love the Bills taking the ball, trying to be aggressive to go get points. I like the play call. Amari Cooper's open. It's just one of those things that, he unfortunately dropped the ball just in those circumstances, but I don't hate it. I hope they don't go away from it. Especially in situations to where like you feel like you can dictate the rest of the getting up early on the Titans probably would have buried them even earlier than they did. So I don't overly hate that situation because coming out of half, you're not expecting Mason Rudolph to do anything once you make your halftime adjustments. And that side of it ended up being true. The Bills stopped him on a key fourth down run defense. Third and fourth down run defense continues to be a strength of this roster. And you saw that in this game as well. So that's what I'm going to say about taking the ball first, because the Bills aren't scared of them double dipping, especially when it's not someone like Mahomes. So the only negative to that was you would have liked to see Amari Cooper make that catch. But someone says not right, says not a touchdown, bobble the ball. I thought there was a little bobble in there. Ultimately, I thought he had the touchdown prior to the bobble. I thought it should have been once you cross the goal line, it's different than the rest of the field. That's going to be my argument. Not a huge deal either way. It was either to go up 17 or 21. I mean, against a good opponent, maybe that could have came back to matter. Not at that point in the game. You're talking about the fourth quarter. So ultimately, it didn't really matter. I just cared more for Keon. It was a great play on the ball. I'm still going to say he had the plane broken with possession by the time then the bobble happened. That's how I saw the play. I think it's an inconsistent call to where if that's in the middle of the field, I think it would be different. How did you see that? Not that it's a huge deal, but it is. Would have loved to see Keon get that touchdown.
Let me preface this by saying one more thing about the tailgate. Okay. I'm going to be honest. I did not make it into the stadium. It wasn't because I was feeling ill, if you know what I mean. It was because usually I wait for tickets to drop, and I figured they started at 200, and I was like, that's way too much to see the Titans, whether it was Will Levis or Mason Rudolph. I was like, they'll drop once we get closer to kickoff, right? Like probably 150, 125. They went up to $300, then 400, then 500. And I was like, there is no way in heck that I'm paying that much to go see Mason Rudolph. So I just went to Danny's. I went to the Big Tree. I watched a little bit on the scoreboard. So I kind of moved around on Sunday. So I didn't see everything because was that in your end zone? You were in the corner, right?
I was in more around the 30, 40 yard line. But yes, it was close to my sideline. Yep.
Okay. So I can't remember. The Bills scored after that, right? With Coleman?
No, they kicked a field goal, obviously, on that drive. And then Mason Rudolph had the ball, drove down the field through the interception to DeMar. The Bills came down and scored with Ray Davis. This was the fourth quarter. So it was out of hand at that time. But the way that it went was it didn't end up mattering. I'm just caring more for Keon Coleman because I thought it was a ridiculous play. It was right in front of me. And I thought that he had possession by the time he broke the plane. Hussey is known to make these calls that are about him. Luckily, they didn't come back to bite the Bills. I don't think there's enough there they called it a touchdown. I don't think that there's enough there to overturn what I would envision as when he broke the plane, it being a touchdown, regardless of what happens from there. The play's supposed to be dead. So that's kind of how I saw it. Not a huge deal. I just wanted to go down on Keon Coleman's ledger. He had such a fantastic game. Not only helping, from the famous clip, him helping Amari Cooper with the hot route, with the audible, with the basically with the alert that Josh Allen called. I mean, he's probably just asking Keon what alert he called or what that means, because obviously Amari Cooper knows how to run that route and knows what route he should be running. So I think it's just a matter of making sure he's on the same page, and Coleman was able to help him there. And what Amari Cooper was able to do for Coleman, I mean, he dragged a couple of defenders out of his way at one point for a big play. He also cleared up Dalton Kincaid earlier in the game. So, Amari, that's the kind of stuff you're looking for that people claim that even when, here's the argument to Stephon Diggs, Kevin, this whole offseason was, it's not necessarily the production that we didn't see down the stretch. Everybody pointed to that. It's the what he's able to do,
the distraction, right?
What he's able to do on the other sideline, making sure the corner one's on him, and taking the distraction away and having, at the end of the year, Shakir and Kincaid, both as well at the end of last season, be able to do what they need to do and rack yardage. And we're starting to see a little bit about that with Amari Cooper. I still think there's work to be done for the Bills and a few other positions I could see the Bills target. We'll get into that in a little bit. But ultimately, the Bills ran 100% zone coverage in the first half. That's absurd, unheard of. That may come down to let's see what Mason Rudolph does, because once we know what he's going to do, we're going to completely adjust. The Bills then switch to 50% man coverage in the second half. May not seem like that big of a deal, but to go from 100% and 0 to 50-50 is a big switch in game. The Bills made it happen. Mason Rudolph did nothing against single high man. The Bills were even bringing in, based on who was hurt or who was coming in and out, they were playing a little bit of Balin Spector. They were even playing a little bit more down in the box and making sure they're watching the leaked out drag route or the leaked out tight end on screen plays. And the Bills bottled it right up, including a pretty poor day by Tony Pollard, no matter how it may have felt. Tony Pollard had an awful day, negative 0.3 EPA. Not a very good efficient day from Tony Pollard. So the Bills did take that away in the run game, and they played pretty sufficient. What was really annoying was the 17 for 23 that Mason Rudolph was in the first half. That was pretty annoying. He had a bunch of big chunk play at the end of the game with the end of the half with the Hail Mary that went underneath to Ridley, who then was messing around with the ball around the 10. But that still was a big chunk, 40 yards there. But ultimately, I don't think I know there was some distension in the first quarter and first half. You can't honestly tell me, maybe you didn't think the Bills would win by 30, but you can't honestly tell me that there was that you were really worried that Mason Rudolph, he couldn't, from the stands, he couldn't see his open receivers down the field. He couldn't throw past 8 yards. The Bills went single high and completely took all that away. I don't like Callahan going for it on fourth down in the first drive up 3. I mean, in your own 40. That's I know we want aggression. That's aggressive. That's a tough decision. One that should be questioned on the Tennessee side. The way you were playing defensively there, even putting Josh back inside his own 10 there, still pretty helpful to give yourself a good start to the second half. You can't go for it there. The game is over. You ended the game for yourself at that point. You remember off the first drive, Cat? You remember that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a tough time to go for it, in my opinion. I know you're trying to lean into your 3-point lead. The difference is, though, if you get caught, it's probably going to be very, very bad. And it was. So ultimately, I thought that was a poor coaching decision, over aggressive. You don't have the Lions offense to be doing that kind of stuff. I thought it was a pretty poor decision, but helped the Bills. And that pretty much set the Bills on for future success. Do I still think the Bills need a wide receiver, though, with everything being said? I think that they could always use the most talent possible on this roster. I think that there's plenty of snaps to be given. I don't know what's going on with Curtis Samuel, both on the field, both off the field, both with his snaps. I guess he's got a shoulder injury, a pec injury. It looked okay. He was on the field today. I don't know. But if he's hurt or can't play, the Bills only have 4 receivers and have to call up Shavers again. So ultimately, I still wish the Bills held on to MVS, at least for now. No harm, no foul with him signing in New Orleans over other locations. I don't think that I care as much. But I think the Bills could still use a few additions, and we'll talk about some of those additions. But Kevin, what was your overall opinion of the Titans game? Anything else you want to get out there, or anything you want to discuss from a perspective that you saw?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because when you were saying that we kind of expected this to happen, I actually predicted 34-10 on our show last week, and then I increased it by 3 points because I figured Rudolph is slightly better than Levis. So I said, okay, he's going to get him one more field goal. So my final score prediction was 34-13. So it ended up being 34-10, which is exactly what I said. It just took the Bills a little while to get there. Now that's fine because you're playing the Titans, so you have a little bit of wiggle room, but you're not going to have that wiggle room as we saw against a team like Baltimore or Houston. And when I was recording Cuse's Corner afterwards, I was looking into some stats here, and look at this. This is pretty crazy. So the Bills scored 3 points in the first half versus Baltimore, 3 points in the first half versus Houston, 3 points in the second half versus the Jets, and then 7 points in the first half versus the Titans. So as I noted, they're 5-2. They have a 2.5 game lead in the AFC East, and they're still averaging over 28 points per game. So imagine what they can do when they put a full 4 quarters together, because as I said, the first 2 games listed there, it came back to bite them. You can't put yourself in a hole to a good team in the Ravens or the Texans. Against the Jets, okay, you can get away with it. Against the Titans, yeah, you can get away with it. You had that strong second half, which was just night and day when Josh Allen was 4 of 11 for 65 yards, and then 17 of 23 for 258 yards, which was a career high in the second half for Josh. So credit to the Bills for making those adjustments and pulling it together. But I would like to see them come out a lot stronger and a lot faster instead of kind of just sleeping through the first couple of drives. I mean, if you look at the play-by-play, let me just throw this in there, because when we were talking about that Coleman drop, I was thinking that it was the Ray Davis touchdown right after, but you're right. That was the ensuing drive after that interception. But when you look at the play-by-play here, it was punt, 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 touchdown, punt. So, another punt. So they had 6 possessions in the first half, and they punted on 5 of those. And then going to the second half, it was touchdown, field goal, touchdown, field goal, touchdown. So just
Perfect
a stark
half.
contrast in what they did.
Yeah, I mean, the Bills made adjustments on both sides of the ball. That's what you want to see. Real briefly, someone said happened last week with Devontae. I think he's talking about Ernest Jones going from the Titans to the Seahawks. The difference was close. Devontae didn't play, though. Like, he didn't suit up with his fake injury. But yes, the player did. And just it happens all the time, like in the playoffs, when a team plays the same team back-to-back from the regular season to the playoffs. But switching rosters, those are 2 close examples. But Devontae didn't play against the Steelers on the Raiders side, as he had that hamstring injury. But to play like every snap against the Bills like he did against the Titans, and now apparently they're saying Seattle is saying that he's going to play this weekend after not even being there yet. I mean, I that's wild. Like that's wild. He's not even in the building, going from Tennessee, which was just in Buffalo, back to Nashville to be traded for another linebacker who he's playing about equal football to then being in the lineup. Like, I don't know if they have any history together. Like, Jones obviously comes from the Rams, but like, and McDonald comes from the Ravens. So I'm not really sure where
I think their systems are similar, but I don't know exactly.
I would assume so. Seattle and Tennessee like aren't overly similar. So I guess the Rams in a way it's bold. Like, I guess the Bills played Cooper 30% of the snaps roughly coming from just down the street. I mean, he was here a day earlier and it's receiver, but playing, I can't see him playing too much after not even being on the roster and then heading the defense. Like, that was a wild trade to me. I don't necessarily know what the difference there was in that trade.
I think it's run defense based on what I could gather. It seems like Jerome Baker hasn't been able to fully recover from his early season hamstring injury. And it was Tim Booth who was on WGR today from the Seattle Times, and he was saying that Baker just really hasn't been shooting the right gaps and hasn't been aggressive enough in run defense. And he said that they were just kind of small in general, which is funny because Tyrell Dodson is their starting middle linebacker, and obviously we are familiar with him. And Dodson was kind of polarizing because I thought he was solid, but nothing like a clear-cut number 1 linebacker, right? So he's essentially their middle linebacker, and I'm curious if he's been calling the plays right along, or that wasn't Baker, was it?
6'2", 230. They're both the same height and weight in terms of the trade that went down. I mean, I guess transitioning Dodson outside is going to help them a little bit. It's a strange trade. And then also giving up the 4th round pick with it. It's a stranger trade. Like, what's funny is, just off the cuff, PFF ranks Baker 42nd and Jones 43rd, just out of their own eye test. And they are like, there's a lot of similarities with the players, but it just seems like a weird time to transition linebacker to linebacker with 4th round pick with it. And then moving Dodson over, like, that's a lot of changes in 1 week. I hope the Bills are the beneficiaries of those changes. Maybe that will tick and be better on all cylinders in a few weeks. But I'm hoping that week isn't this as soon as a few days after that trade happens. You're moving multiple players. Jerome Baker inside the huddle, just trading him because like apparently, he might be a slight tick worse than Ernest Jones, even though a lot of things don't point to that. I could pull up some more defensive advanced analytics. I'm just throwing off PFF grades at the moment, which I don't love, but at least give me some baseline of like starting point of the discussion to see what's accurate. But I just think that's a bold move to make for a team that's 4-3. But anything else, Kevin, first, before we get into the Seahawks game more, anything else from the Titans game that you saw, wanted to talk about, or just kind of what it was? I mean, I know they started slow. Luckily, it's a week-to-week league. It is weird to have a starting quarterback be announced on Saturday. So I think the Bills wanted to feel that out a little bit. I'm not mad at the defense at all. Like Mason Rudolph was okay in the first half and terrible in the second. It's more the offense that really didn't have any reason to play that poorly in the first half. The Bills' defense was fine. They weren't great in the first half, but they were sufficient. And ultimately, allowing them to do nothing the rest of the game was about what you're looking for. And Bass did kick well. That is a good note. Yeah, I mean, what can you do? Like the Bills are in a contract situation to where not the easiest contract to get out of. Really no benefit, even if we want to assume there is going to Haversnick. Like it's not like you don't want to make that transition. He was a free agent for a reason. The Bills are still trying out kickers for a reason, including the former Packers cut kicker Naverson. I said that could be a possibility to check him out. But Haversick going in there, and it's still not ideal. Like as much as we just wanted Bass gone, it's still not a situation to where it's going to be definitely an upgrade. So I'm glad to see him bounce back and start to get right, because it was a weird sunny day. I mean, there was really not a ton of elements. So that's pretty interesting. Also, what's interesting to me is the Titans in this game, I thought put on a pretty good defensive performance in the first half and then completely fell apart in the second half. I just don't think they were able to do anything against the Bills. So Josh Allen was able to make some adjustments in the game, not just Sean McDermott against Mason Rudolph. It was also the offensive side of the ball and the offensive adjustments. And I mean, Ray Davis played well. Like, I think he needs to start getting some snaps. Like, I think that like the way he runs is really efficient to what Brady's doing. I don't like what is your opinion on the running backs in Buffalo? Obviously, Ty Johnson's got his little third down role in the red zone. But between Cook and Davis, like it's tough for me to say that like David or that Cook should be getting every snap right now.
I'm glad you went there because when you said, is there anything else from the Titans game? I wanted to talk about this rookie class for the Bills because I think Bean really hit this draft out of the park. But let's start with the running back. So with Ray Davis, I'll admit, I wanted either Braylon Allen or Audric Estime because I'm a Notre Dame fan, and I liked how Allen ran, and I figured he would be that nice compliment, right? And I figured Allen and Allen would be cool to have a backfield. So the Bills went with Ray Davis, and at the time I was like, okay, I don't really know much about him. I didn't scout him too much. He wasn't on my board, but my board and Brandon Bean's boards are different, and that's a good thing because I'm not the GM. I'd like to think that I know a good amount, but Bean ultimately knows best. And we're seeing why the Bills selected Ray Davis over the last couple of weeks. He's been really impressive. And I believe right before we came on, I just saw that Ray Davis is a number 1 ranked rookie running back by PFF this year.
I'm not sure, honestly. Is that what they're saying?
It was one of those where I opened Twitter, and as I was like halfway through reading it, it refreshed, and I was like, okay, I was reading that, but thanks anyways. But I saw enough of it to see that Ray Davis is ranked pretty high by PFF. I think the official stat was he's the number 1 rookie running back.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, I was going to say I did not see. I'm like, I don't know how anyone could have like Derrick Henry below Ray Davis, but
yeah, in terms of rookies.
Gotcha. There you go. Yep. That's probably true. Ray Davis is 17th based on PFF's model. And
that's still pretty good.
Yep. Still pretty good.
Is he fantasy?
Seventh receiver. He just doesn't get enough run to be fantasy, depending on your fantasy league. He doesn't quite, especially when Cook's healthy. I can't see you wanting to play him. Definitely have as a key contributor on your bench. I just can't see him being fantasy relevant right now with James Cook being healthy and getting the healthy workload.
But I'm wondering if they could really give him more touches because he's been so productive over the last couple of weeks. And I really think it's a great 1-2 punch between Cook and Davis, where essentially Cook can do a little bit of everything. He's speedy, he's quick, he's shifty. I mean, he still hits a hole pretty well. But then you have Ray Davis as like that big bruiser. Just he hits it, right? Like he goes hard. He's a north to south back. And I think that could also work off of Amari Cooper, because if you have the defense paying so much attention to Cooper, and now it's like, okay, now we got to pay attention to Coleman. And well, don't forget about Shakir and Kincaid over the middle. And then boom, you put Allen under center and just run it right up the gut when the defense is playing back, right? Like we talked about that before. Like once you make them respect that, then the Bills can maybe catch them off guard and try to pick up 5 to 7 chunks at a time.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an efficient running game right now. And if you look at PFF likes James Cook still, and it likes Ty Johnson. Ty Johnson's the 30th ranked PFF player at the running back position in total. So he's ahead of many starters in the league. And then you have James Cook 23rd, and then Ray Davis 17th. So there's definitely 3 running backs right in there, and I could pull their EPA per play as well. So there's definitely some running efficiencies right now in the Bills running offense. As we pull some advanced statistics now, because obviously PFF is just eye test. It's just a bunch of people who have an opinion and kind of score that opinion accordingly. It's got a little bit of use, but the grades aren't overly useful. But if you look at from an EPA per play standpoint, I mean, both players are playing fairly well. Running backs don't get great EPAs because obviously it's tough to change a game unless you're Derrick Henry on a play-to-play basis. But they're both running the ball at a fairly efficient rate. Explosive play percentage by Ray Davis, 10% of his plays are explosive, 23% for first downs, 0.818 yards over expectation on yards created. So he's definitely has some fine looking advanced statistics, and based on the advanced metrics, he's playing a little bit better than James Cook right now. So yards per carry is very, very similar. Yards after contact, believe it or not, Ray Davis has almost a yard more after contact than James Cook, Kevin. I mean, at some point that becomes relevant in certain situations, a full yard, facing more people in the box. So Ray Davis sees about 7 people in the box on average. James Cook sees 6.5 on average. So a whole nother half of a player based on each snap in the box more than James Cook starts to become sufficient or pretty significant at some point as you look through some of the advanced statistics. 41% success rate per rush, which is very strong. James Cook is 37%. So a lot of the advanced analytics will show you Ray Davis definitely, probably had some moments that aren't overly important in the game. That's going to skew that a little bit. But he's playing much better football analytically in a lot of different facets than James Cook is right now. So we'll see if the Bills do anything with that, or if they continue to stay the course, not do anything drastic when it comes to the running back room, and continue to kind of operate the same way that they have. But now I know you mentioned Ray Davis. Was there other rookies you wanted to mention before we get into the Seahawks game that you said he had hit it out of the park? Who were you referring to and why?
Well, I think, with Keon Coleman starting to burst a little bit here, he's the obvious answer. We talked about Ray Davis. Cole Bishop, we're still waiting to see some more on him. Didn't McDermott say something about Mike Edwards today, saying that he was intended to be at the starter, he was signed to be the starting safety?
Yes, he said that. I don't know if it was today, but I think it was Monday, maybe.
I thought it was today. I didn't hear the full question. I didn't get the full context. So there's not an injury at the safety room, right?
No injuries right now in the safety room.
I feel like if we're
someone may have just asked, why is he inactive? Why is he making so much money to be inactive? Could have been one along the lines of one of those questions. Usually I'm in tune with most things asked to McDermott, but a lot of times that stuff is just fodder. But I had heard that they did sign him to be a starter. And maybe it was a question about DeMar, Kevin, possibly. Like, what are your opinions of DeMar and how he's played? Something along those lines, but it could have been. Mike Edwards, obviously I've tweeted it many times. Mike can earn between $750 and $1 to $2 million in bonuses by how he plays. So there's definitely some, if he's active, let alone plays, let alone snap counts, let alone interceptions, a lot of those things can start to infiltrate your cap space. And obviously you'll take that if the player is playing well. but the Bills may have made the assumption and the decision that Mike Edwards isn't going to be that much better than Cole Bishop or DeMar Hamlin. So at some point, the Bills are like, you know what? Cole Bishop's going to be our starter in the future. We like DeMar this year, at least for this defense. This is a situation, if that's the case, just like they did MVS, Mike Edwards, would be an interesting player to trade. They can save some money. Go ahead and trade him for a late round draft choice. If anything, the Bills can save some money that way. So it's definitely a tough decision, but if you're going to make him inactive, because you're thinking about cap space or if it's just straight up, he can't beat out the other three. That's going to be a problem. Then obviously Cam Lewis has a little bit of everything. Like if he can't get on the field in any of those situations, put him in the Puna Ford bucket, man. Put him in the Puna Ford bucket.
I guess so. So, I mean, that's still a little perplexing to me, but either way, I mean, I still really like the Cole Bishop pick. I think he's going to end up being a really nice player for the Bills. And to be fair, DeMar came back with that interception. So as much as we might knock DeMar, and I'm not saying us specifically, but a lot of people have been getting on DeMar saying that he's a 6th round pick for a reason. He was never one of those highly touted prospects. He's never going to flash athletically. He's one of those guys who knows the system. So you would like to think that he's going to be in the right place at the right time. But someone who could pop is Bishop. So I think it's only a matter of time. I'm still curious to see what they're going to do with Edwards, because again, if it was a game like Houston and he still couldn't crack the roster, still couldn't be a starter, then I don't know if and when we'll see him. But either way, I do like the Cole Bishop pick. And then we got to talk about Dwayne Carter, because he's been playing some really, really good football the last couple of weeks.
All right. Is there something specifically that you see from Dwayne Carter that you think is that you like? Just his tackles for loss. I mean, he's definitely been a pretty good contributor to this roster. The Bills acquiring him by trading back twice. All the advanced metrics right now are showing Keon Coleman in the top 3 in most against rookies right now. Really, Malik Neighbors is heading the charge. But after that, Brian Thomas Jr. is right there. And then Keon Coleman. So it's like, well, the Bills got the guy they wanted. Everyone's like, well, they got lucky. They kind of traded back. Anything could have happened. Well, the Bills played the board right. And by doing that, they got I tweeted this just yesterday. They got not only, we all talk about Dwayne Carter, that's the obvious one, but the second trade back was to get up a little bit higher so they could be in position. They took Cedric Van Granger out of that trade. And then they felt like they had enough capital in the 5th round. They could move for a 4th round this year that could help them in the trade deadline or in this coming spring. So the Bills are able to make counter moves from one move with Keon Coleman to put these players on this roster. We're not talking about a potential nice-looking interior lineman in Van Granger who's active on game days, or we're not talking about Carter. If the Bills just stay put and say take their guy, and it would have been rightfully so to take their guy, the Bills definitely added some depth to their roster by being patient, hoping for the best, and it playing off. Ultimately, the Bills did exactly what they needed to do to add in some roster talent to what they figured was, by at the time, they needed a few more draft choices to make this happen. So it was really good to see. And the Bills are still, Brandon Beane just mentioned on the Pat McAfee show, 10 draft choices. He's expecting those 2 comp picks from Leonard Floyd and from Gabe Davis. So the Bills are in great position still, and multiple 4s, multiple 6s, multiple 2s. They're in pretty good position, setting themselves up nicely, minus a 3rd round draft choice, to continue to add talent to this roster. So there's been very efficient on the rookie draft front, and he's been good last year. I thought his draft class with Kincaid last year was pretty good. Dorian Williams is now coming into his own. I thought it was a fairly solid, very solid trade. It was a very solid draft class too. So lately he's been adding some more of those role players, efficient players to the roster on cheap contracts. So back-to-back years, he's been pretty. And then obviously Osiris Torrance in the 2nd round. I mean, he's had a pretty good draft class now in back-to-back seasons to add to some of that depth that's been needed in this room. So we can't be too mad at his draft positions. There's been a few misses, as anybody has, but lately, and then even the Bernard draft, what another good draft. James
Cook.
Yeah, James Cook and Bernard. What a good draft to take away from there. Still working with Kyrie Elam, but then Christian Benford. Like ultimately, you've added some really big talent for cheap on this roster over the last few seasons that are some of these. We're talking about Ray Davis. We're talking about James Cook. We're talking about Christian Benford. We're talking about Dorian Williams. We're talking about Terrell Bernard. Really some efficient players that have been added to the, even Osiris Torrance to a lesser extent, and Dwayne Carter. You've added some solid football players on this roster for being able to agree with Whittle, for being able to, in his draft value ranking, Brandon Beane's draft value ranking is still top 3. So even with some misses, he is still producing overall analytical valuable players based on their draft position, period. Like anybody wants to bat 1,000. You don't want to draft Cody Ford. You don't want to miss as much on Kyer Elam. But the Bills have hit so many draft. AJ Epinesa has turned into a valuable draft choice. I mean, he's a great football player. AJ Epinesa is an underrated football player who was a dog this weekend, as well as Greg Rousseau. Another pick I was unsure of. He didn't play during COVID. I was unsure of how he would translate to the NFL. Oh my God, 6 quarterback hits. I think 6 or 7 quarterback hits, led the league in the amount in one game. And it's just an efficient defensive line that I think is finally starting to tick. Daquan Jones has been really good. Obviously not a draft choice. But Ed Oliver was a draft choice. So the Bills defensive line, who's getting Von Miller back next week, has been a super efficient D-line, which leads us into the Seattle game. But lastly, I wanted to ask you about these draft picks real quickly, then we'll get into the Seattle game. Is there, do you think, here's kind of the overarching view. Yeah, obviously we didn't bring in Khalil Shakir either in this equation, right? He was in that draft class too. Another stud slot receiver. At some point that adds up. You're not getting, Jamar Chase, but Jamar Chase, the Bills don't pick that high to ever secure a player like Malik Neighbors or Jamar Chase. But if you're going to get Keon Coleman's and Khalil Shakir's and Dwayne Carter's, if you're going to start hitting it on that level, at some point, this is sustainable. That's where we talk about these windows closing and opening and closing and opening. It lets you go out and make a trade because you have so many draft positions, draft choices. You can go make a trade now for a veteran and be like, you know what Amari Cooper did to the rest of the field was so valuable to us that we're going to trade a late 3rd round draft choice on a one half a season basis and then maybe re-sign that veteran. He's only 30. Most people forget that. Amari Cooper feels 35, 34, kind of it for him. But he's got another contract in him, at least, to be efficient. And the Bills are probably very interested in seeing what he can do here with Josh Allen, as Brandon Beane alluded to. So all that to say, that's a lot of young talent. And the question to you would be, as we get into the rest of the show and talking about trade targets and the Seahawks, do you think that the Bills should use another draft choice to add to this roster, knowing that Brandon Beane's been pretty good, especially in some of those mid rounds from 2 to 6, specifically? Do you like the ability for him to go out and get somebody else to this roster just in general? Or are you somebody that's man, I don't know that I want to draft all these draft choices to go all in an 8-week run? Where do you stand on the philosophy of what they did with Cooper, but beyond Cooper, is there another move mandated to not only help you against the Dolphins and Colts coming up, but beyond as you're looking into January?
I try to stay in the middle. I try to do what Bean says and say, let's try to win now and in the future. So I think the big move already came with Cooper. I'm not expecting, speaking of another Cooper, now that Cooper Kupp is on the trade block, I'm not expecting Brandon Beane to be in on those talks. Maybe he'll call, just doing his due diligence, just to be hey, what do you want for him? And if it meets our price, then who knows? I just don't think that it meets financially or schematically at this point. So if anything, I just see them shedding off a late Saturday pick and maybe getting a safety, a defensive back, another defensive lineman, maybe offensive lineman, with Grable being out with that injury. So I think the big fish is off the market now. Now it's just bolstering up your roster with those late round draft picks. Because I was a big proponent of giving up that 2nd round pick that you got in the Diggs trade. You don't have to do that now because you got Cooper.
No.
You didn't even have to use that. So now the Bills still have 2 2nd round picks next year, and they have Amari Cooper. So that was a great job of balancing it all by Beane. So if anything, I don't think that means you should use that 2nd round pick to go get Myles Garrett or something. I don't think that fits either.
What's interesting about the Ernest Jones trade is it shows a little bit of precedent that teams are willing to do a player for player upgrade slash difference. Like something that I never think is overly possible is trading like, oh, I'm going to give you Mike Edwards. Okay, okay. But like in a Cisco trade, like that could make sense. Like, okay, you take Mike Edwards back, you're going to need a safety, see what he can do there. We'll take Cisco, and then maybe we're going to have to give you a late round draft choice with that. So that becomes more interesting to me if you can make things like that, because ultimately, like, look, if you're if you're talking about safety here, like you're talking about Andre Cisco being a potential upgrade to safety, you're still talking about putting to the bench Damar Hamlin. So does the roster feel like, and the GM and the coach feel like they're going to need to bench Damar Hamlin in that situation to where they haven't felt the need to do that yet for either Cole Bishop or Mike Edwards? So there's definitely some discussion around safety is an interesting one to me. I would like a top end guy, but if he's not going to be toward the top 15, it's tougher for me to think the Bills will just take like a Mike Edwards, whether they trade him or not, or cut him like they did MVS. Taking Mike Edwards and turning him into, let's just use an Andre Cisco scenario. I just don't know where the Bills are standing in that. Like, what is the fundamental upgrade there? Is it enough to kind of change up that room and put DeMar to the bench? I don't know. Only Sean and Brandon Beane, even more so, who Brandon Beane has full trade autonomy. He doesn't have to talk to his owner. He doesn't, I assume, associates with the head coach. But Brandon Beane's going to make whatever move Brandon Beane wants to make. So if he feels like there's enough upgrade to go to Andre Cisco from a Mike Edwards, essentially, and then benching DeMar, that could make sense. But ultimately, it does involve benching who they feel like has the job at this moment. And they've always liked Damar Hamlin. He's one of their guys, just like Levi Wallace was, just like Dane Jackson was a little bit. So they definitely do, especially at the DB position, choose their guys. And Cisco's on a, $3.5 million contract. Jacksonville would need half of that because of the time of the year it is. So it's affordable. But ultimately, do they see the fundamental upgrade in an 8-week benefit right now to the safety roster? It's going to be tough to think that they would without even I think that Mike Edwards would have gotten a little bit more run. If they go safety, I think it's got to be a top 15 guy, a guy that can come in and change games, or at least somewhat change games, and not just a very fundamentally slight upgrade like we just saw from the Jerome Baker to Ernest Jones trade. I just think trading a 4th round pick for that little benefit is challenging. Like, man, in the middle of the season, changing your back or your middle backer out, moving him over, putting in a new one, trading the other one away, like middle of the game week in a pretty big game for your team. I guess it's an AFC NFC game, so you lose. It's not the end of the world. But I think that bring it back to Seattle for a minute. I think it's a bold move to do that. That'd be like similar, like the Bills would never trade Bernard, but that'd be similar to I don't know, trading Dorian Williams. I mean, I know there's a little bit of age difference there. Dorian is only in his 2nd year. Jones is, in his last year of his contract. But it's similar to that regards, but it's strange to make that move. So, but I do agree that the Bills need a playmaker and one more position on the defensive side of the ball. And yeah, I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to is, will the Bills add a playmaker on that side and ultimately take someone off the field? I've always pushed for defensive end. We'll get into some of our trade talks, but I want to talk about the Seattle real quickly, Kevin. And we'll get into more of what the Bills need to target, whether it's at defensive end, where I'm looking, D tackle, linebacker is going to be tough with Milano and Bernard being day-to-day, Bernard day-to-day and Milano coming back in December. It's going to be really tough to add a linebacker for a month. I just wouldn't see that position. And we just talked about safety for a little bit with Hamlin. I don't know that the Bills are overly eager unless it's a top flight guy. And then corners, obviously pretty deep. They're, pretty good at corner now. It's always been a strength for them. Defensively is going to be tough, so I always shoot to the defense line. So we'll get into that here at the end of the show. But let's talk about Seattle for a minute. As you look at the Seahawks, they've definitely had some offensive line issues, putting another one on IR today, cycling through the right side of their line, definitely having some issues up and down the offensive line and their DBs. Their first, second, third boundary corners, we'll say for now, have been hurt. Obviously, I think Reek Woolen's supposed to play this week. He struggled. He got benched last last year at one point. He has struggled at times this year, but Trey Brown, their fourth round draft choice from a few years ago, is hurt. I don't know if he's going to play. Their fifth round draft choice from this year, Nehemiah Pritchett, a guy that had a nice looking promise, is now on the injury report. Behind them, all they really have is a college free agent from this year, D. Williams, and then obviously Witherspoon in the slot. And they play Julian Love, who's pretty decent, and Kobe Bryant, which leaves a little bit to desired, and Kayvon Wallace at the safety position. It's a rough back, and that's probably been one of their biggest challenges as a team this year, why they're 4-3. They did go in and look good against Atlanta. I thought they were just starting to skid. And they're making moves proactively to make this roster better. I mean, they've been pretty interestingly going out there they traded for Robertson Harris. They obviously stayed in that same division with AFC South and traded for Ernest Jones with Tennessee, between Jacksonville and Tennessee. So they're trying to upgrade that roster for what looks to be a wild card team, but they may feel like this is the year that San Francisco's down. This is the year that the Rams may be selling. I don't know what Arizona is. They're going to maybe hover around 500 for most of the year. So Seattle must be feeling the division, Kevin.
Yeah, and they started 3-0, then they dropped 3 in a row. One of them was an ugly loss at home to the Giants, and then they had a big win this past week in Atlanta. So, I mean, they're 4-3 right now. They're in first place. San Francisco's down, and they're going to be even more down now with Ayuk done for the year, right?
Yep, yes, yep.
Debo has pneumonia, and San Fran is just always dealing with injuries. So you're right. I mean, they might feel like this is their opportunity. At the very least, if they can't get the division, then maybe they can sneak into the I won't even say sneak in because like they're legit a good team. Geno is a good quarterback. So if they can't win the division, if San Fran does come back, then I think that the Seahawks think that they can at least get in the wild card this year.
Yeah, they at least think that they're a top wild card team. They at least think they're 11th in DVOA. They at least think that at the very minimum that they are a fourth to fifth seed in this NFC playoff race. You got Detroit and Minnesota there, which is going to complicate the 5 seed a little bit. Obviously, you have Washington and Philly, going to complicate the 5 seed a little bit. So at the very least, they probably feel like that 7 spot is available or the 4 spot if they can't win the division. So there's very much so a path to success again for Seattle, under Geno Smith, who's been, successful as of late. I kind of thought that team was done once they transitioned from Russell Wilson, from Pete Carroll, from some of the old guard. And I kind of thought that team would always hover around the 7-win mark, is going to continue to be a 9 to 10 win team right now. And I was hoping to have a Seattle guest on, wasn't able to pull it off this week. But they have a DK Metcalf injury who's not going to practice today or tomorrow. Maybe plays limitedly. The MCL is known to miss 2.3 games on the average for the kind of injury that he has. At the very least, they're very inefficient if they do play. So it's a big benefit. I mean, I like Jackson Smith and Jigba as a player. I think he's limited. I like what he can do, but isn't overall that big of a threat. And then obviously you're always going to have, Tyler Lockett, can still show up at times in the season. So he's, he may be someone to watch, but he's kind of always done his thing for the last 10 years almost now at this point. So there's, without DK, that changes the game a little bit. DK Metcalf is a real problem. Like, he's played some really good football. 0.23 targets per route ran. That means he's getting the ball on a quarter of every route he runs. That's a crazy number. Adjusted yards per route ran is 2.04 for DK Metcalf. His target share is 25% of every pass thrown. That's incredible. An incredible target share for him. 188 yak. Total EPA 5.7. So he's playing some good football. But Tyler Lockett's still getting it done. I mean, he's still been efficient in his reps. So there's 3 good receivers. Take one off the field, advantage Bills. So that's really the first thing that sticks out to me. And that O-line, man, like I can't get off the offense without talking about, you're bringing back 2 guys that may be ready soon, who they just designated for return. They did say today that they're going to take a little bit of time, and Abe Lucas, who they really like there. For some reason, he's a fan favorite. I'm not really sure, but he's definitely one of those guys where they like in Seattle. And then George Fant, the journeyman George Fant, he's a guy there as well. But they took Lucas in the 3rd round 2 years ago. So he's a nice looking tackle who they like, but I don't think either will suit up. They just placed one on IR today as well. So they're definitely haven't had a ton of injuries there, believe it or not. You have Artie Burns, Nuoso, the outside linebacker, Rayshon Jenkins. So they've had a few. But Stone Forsythe just went on IR today to make room for the Ernest Jones move as well. So Michael Jarrell is their right tackle. Anthony Bedford, the right side of their line. Charles Cross is their left tackle, first round pick from a few years ago. Laken Tomlinson does his thing. Connor Williams coming off the injury from Miami, who's always been a solid center. But they got problems to me at the guard position. They got problems at the right tackle position. That's gotta go into your game plan, doesn't it?
Yeah, that probably is one of their weaker spots, but it's weird because this is a number one passing offense in the NFL. They are averaging 270 yards per game through the air. And you would think that if they have such a weak offensive line, how are they getting that to occur, right? And I think it just comes down to Geno Smith has like literally established himself as
top 10 guy. Yep.
Top 10, you think? I was going to say, I don't want to go that far, but at least top 20, top 15. But he's probably in that tier of, 12 to 15.
Probably, yeah. At this stage, I mean, you could argue he's playing like it's semantics, but he's playing between like 8 and 12 football. 8 to 12th ranked in the quarterback rankings football.
When we did our rankings over the summer, like we didn't even think to put Geno in the top 15 or 6. I think we went to 16. And Geno, to be honest, he didn't really cross my mind. But I think as of right now, he's got to be at least in the top 20, if not top 15.
Yeah, for sure. Like he's playing good football. I mean, his line, like you have Charles Cross. So Charles Cross, their left tackle's good. Like he's a good football player. He's a top 10 tackle in the league right now. So he's getting a left tackle play. Connor Williams coming off his injury is going to always play solid center. So he's getting a center and a left tackle. Laken Tomlinson's always going to play mediocre, middle of the road football. So the left side of his line is holding up. So he's going to have a little bit of a strength there. But then you look on the right side of the line and it's a complete mess. Like Bradford's been terrible. He's been an awful player. Stone Forsythe prior to injury has been bad. They said Mike Jarrell played okay. His numbers don't look great. The right side of their O-line is a complete mess. The Bills need to do everything possible to attack that right side. So big day for AJ Epinesa there. Whoever is going to be rushing from that side, they're not good from that right side. That is a complete weakness. They can't skew it. There's no podcaster that can skew that their right side of their line has been horrible. But they are getting solid play from the center and left guard and good play from the left tackle. So that's good enough to make sure you're beating up on bad teams and making sure that you're able to get it done. But over the long haul, that right side's a complete weakness right now. And it's shown up. It's definitely flustered Seattle at times. Losing to the Lions is fine. Losing to the 49ers is even fine. They took advantage of a Dolphins team post Tua. They barely beat the Patriots in week 2, as well as playing a really close game week 1 against a first-time starter in Denver. Really had done nothing in the first 6 weeks. 3-3 is about what they deserved. Lost to the Giants at home until this Falcons game, to where the defense just took advantage of Kirk Cousins and put their offense in prime positions all game. Kenneth Walker has been good in stretches, but still has had his limitations. 14 carries for 69 yards. He hasn't gotten going against the Giants. 5 for 19 against the 49ers. 14 for 32. So he's definitely had his limitations this year running the football, and he missed a game earlier as well. It looks like earlier this season. So they definitely have their limitations from an offensive standpoint. And look, their coach said today, like they like their depth with Jake Bobo and Zach Charbonnet. And, I don't really see much else there. If they're missing Metcalf, it's a completely different offense. No right tackle, missing the receiver 1. That offense is going to struggle. But, being at home is a good benefit for you. And you're going to probably ride Kenneth Walker, even though some of his advanced metrics aren't always that good. So overall, from a DVOA standpoint, let's talk about stats now from the Seattle Seahawks.
I just want to add in.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're talking about the offensive line, and you're talking about Kenneth Walker. And I just want to say it's weird because they are number 1 in terms of passing offense, but they're in the bottom tier of rushing offense. So they're one of 6 teams who aren't even averaging 100 yards per game. They come in at 27th, averaging 97.4 yards. So as much as I want to give Geno credit for being a good quarterback now and really, just having that cool story of turning his career around, maybe we should also speak on the fact that maybe this offensive line is just straight up better in pass protection than they are in run blocking, because I don't think that Kenneth Walker is that much of a worse running back than Geno Smith is a quarterback. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like they would both be on the same tier. Honestly, Walker might be a better running back than Geno is a quarterback. Maybe not this year, but you know what I mean? Like, that separation shouldn't be as big as it is. And he has had some good games this year. So it's just kind of confusing. And it's kind of hard for us to pinpoint it without having a Seattle guest on. But if I'm looking at it from a 5,000 foot view here, I would just say that their offensive line isn't good in general, but maybe if they are a little bit better in some category, maybe it's pass protection.
Yeah, I mean, if you look through like Charles Cross, he's actually a better run blocker. He's good at both, but he's a better run blocker. If you look at Connor Williams, a solid center, better run blocker. If you look at Lincoln Tomlinson, always been a better run blocker, not even just this year. So ultimately, I would argue that they've been pretty poor pass blockers. Like Anthony Bradford has been horrific.
That's weird then how the numbers kind of lay out then, because if they're better in run blocking, how are they so poor in rushing offense, but they're so good in passing offense when Geno is just carving up these defenses and they're getting chunk plays after chunk plays? And sure, you can say that having a guy like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett help with that, but that's just confusing. The numbers don't really match up there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, they let the Giants score 29. They let the 49ers score 36. They let the Lions score 42. So what does that mean? In the last 3 weeks, they were just throwing the ball a ton.
I would say game flow could have a lot to do with that too. Like if they're down, or maybe they just want to throw more in general. So there's more volume with the passing game than there is for Kenneth Walker to really get into a rhythm. Same with Zach Charbonnet. So again, it's kind of hard for us to pinpoint it, but there are some different factors. In terms of scoring, that is one where it's more as you see it, right? There aren't as many factors that go into it. So the Bills are fifth in scoring, averaging 28.4 points per game. Seattle is eighth, averaging 25.7. So with passing offense, total offense, rushing offense, you could probably you could probably go to a couple different areas and say, oh, well, you can attest that, or there's this going on here. They have injuries here. But when it comes to scoring offense, that is pretty much dead on, where it's like, there's no really disputing that. They're averaging 25.7 points per game, just a couple points below the Bills. So no matter what they have going on, they're still putting up points and finding a way to get it done.
Now, I look inside the advanced analytics. Advanced analytics would say, how about this? They have the 10th ranked overall offense. Guess what they have? The 10th ranked overall passing unit. So that kind of matches up. I think that kind of matches the eye test. We talked about Geno being right around the top 10. Passing overall as a unit would say they're 10th, and their offense is 10th, and a lot of that lines up. But guess what's interesting? Their rush offense, guess what they're ranked advanced analytics? 10th. So game flow would say they're playing top 10, 10th, I know, but top 10 football, 10, 10, 10 across the board right now on their advanced metrics. So that would tell you that they're right there, pretty consistent. So game flow for the box score purposes would say when they run the ball, they're playing 10th running football. However, it doesn't match the box score. What I would imagine is, I haven't broken down every film. I was hoping for a Seahawks guest for this. All the film of the Seahawks to tell you they haven't ran the ball enough. And that in moments when they do need to run the ball, they've been decent. Like 10th would tell you they've been just as good running the ball. Their PFF offensive line metrics, their overall SIS metrics would all rank that they're running. Offensive line's been okay. It's been fine. But the game flow in that 3-game losing streak was rough. Losing to the Giants is going to put you in a bind. Getting blown out by San Francisco for the most part. Getting blown out definitely by the Lions. Like, you're going to have defensively, especially getting blown out. Like, you didn't do anything defensively in those games. Their defense hasn't been good. They can get pressure. They show a lot of different pressure packages at you. They just haven't been good as a defensive unit. That's why they've made those changes to Roy Robertson Harris, and why they traded for Ernest Jones, what seems to be a strange upgrade to move, like we said, in the middle of the year, move your middle over to your right, bring in a guy that was just on the Titans in mid-game week, like before he's even in the building, starting him, and getting rid of Baker, who's been a pretty good player in Miami in the past. Probably one of their better players at least on those Miami teams. Just seemed like an interesting move all the way around. And then they definitely have had some offensive line issues, as we already talked about. So It's definitely a pretty interesting, McDonald was hoping to have a better back seven than he does. Most of his talented players are obviously like Jaron Reed and Leonard Williams, who are their defensive starting linemen. Boye Mafe's been pretty good. Derek Hall's been good. And then Witherspoon in their slot corner has been good. But beyond that, you have Trey Brown, who's struggled, one of the worst corners in the league. Hankins hasn't been very good when he's in the game for his 200 and something snaps. Rayshawn Jenkins, who's now on IR but was a starting safety, hasn't been overly good prior to his injury. Starting Kobe Bryant, who isn't very good himself. So they've definitely had some struggles. Terrell Dotson's always going to be an interesting player. He's always going to score out better than he looks on the field. But then, obviously Julian Love's been a pretty good safety for them as well. So they definitely have, some issues. Adding Ernest Jones, who's just a solid middle of the road, middle linebacker, they're hoping is going to make the difference on their roster. But ultimately, there's definitely been some lapses, and most notably, in the corner room. But getting back Tyreek Woolen, who's, obviously one of the best corners in the league when healthy and playing right. Devon Witherspoon's a good corner. Their outside corner too has been a struggle. They've had some problems at safety. Obviously, had a few issues at linebacker. So that would equal where we're getting these really strong, bad metrics from the Seattle defense. But that's their offense, man. Let's turn real quickly to the defense, and we'll talk about.
I got one more thing about the offense.
Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of Kenneth Walker, so it's interesting because he's on pace for having a career year here with rushing yards and receiving yards too. So if you look at his yards per carry, he's averaging 4.7 yards per carry. And as a rookie, when he ran for 1,050 yards and had 9 touchdowns, he had 4.6 yards per carry. Last year it was 4.1. So this year, 4.7. Yeah, I know it's not like anything that shocking. It's not like he's running for 5 or 6 yards per carry, but still, this is so far the best year that he's had statistically in that category. And he already has 6 rushing touchdowns. His career high is, as I said, 9. And he's on pace to break his own personal records in all the receiving categories as well. So that's why I'm just confused at why their rushing offense has just been so spotty this year. But I think, as people are saying in the comments here, it's probably just because they've been so pass happy. Like they've been putting the ball in Geno's hands so much. And maybe if they're down, whether it was the Giants or San Francisco, you're really not going to have opportunities to run. And if you do, Walker probably can't get into that good of a rhythm for those numbers to really go up. Maybe he has good personal numbers, but as a team, maybe they really just can't get into that rhythm,
Yeah, you look at Kenneth Walker has 67 run snaps. Zach Charbonnet has 58 run snaps. Geno Smith has 342 pass snaps. So, ultimately, they're throwing the ball a ton. So the Bills need to come prepared for what looks to be their pass attack, and they're going to have to determine what their course of action is against Geno Smith, depending on if he has DK Metcalf at all at full strength or what they're going to end up doing. Now we turn attention to their defense again, as we've talked about some of the moves they made moving in Ernest Jones. They like to play like a different situational 3-4 with Derek Hall and Draymond Jones kind of on the edge, kind of protecting that a little bit. To mixed results. I'll say, like, they've definitely had mixed results. Draymond Jones has not been very good. That's why they brought in Roy Robertson Harris to play more of a down lineman in their 3-4. The Bills already saw him earlier this year. He's someone that's not overly impressive. Their down linemen have been good. Leonard Williams and Jaron Reed. Those are guys that have been good players in their 3-4 front. Obviously mixing in a little bit with, Byron Murphy II. He's been okay. So, from a stretch of what they're looking to do, it could make sense. But overall, like, they've definitely had some challenges once you get off those down linemen and you start looking across the field a little bit more. So Derek Hall's been a good edge defender for them. But there's been plenty of players that have struggled in their defense. Now let's look at their overall team metrics as we pull that up. They're playing middle of the road football. They've had some good moments, some bad moments. Last week, they were ranked 18th DVOA. They pushed it up after that good performance against Atlanta to 15th. So they're straight in the middle of the league on defense. 14th against the pass, 17th against the rush. So they definitely have their moments struggling against the run. They're out of Seattle. So that's kind of been an interesting stretch of football that they've played. They've actually played the 26th ranked schedule for their defense. So they're playing mediocre football against a pretty bad defensive schedule, meaning the other offense. So the defensive schedule has been 26. It's been super easy. So the results have been middle of the road for a schedule that hasn't been overly good. Of other opponents' offenses, at least, has not been overly strong as a whole. So those are some of the advanced analytics by the numbers. Even the Bills' 21st offenses that they've played. So the Bills by the numbers have actually played better offenses than the Seattle Seahawks. Anything you see about the Seattle defense? Anything that you see that the Bills should be attacking? Like they're, by all accounts, their run defense hasn't been very good. Anything that you'd like to see the Bills do?
I think it's going to come down to Josh Allen versus Geno Smith. I feel like both teams are going to be pass happy. And now I feel like, who was it? Connor McGovern was on today. McGovern was on One Bills Live, and he talked about establishing the line of scrimmage. So it might be in their game plan right now to try to get the ground game going because they think that the Seahawks could be susceptible. Now, I have them as a 28th ranked rushing defense in the NFL. Now, I think your numbers are a little bit more favorable, but either way, I mean, their run defense hasn't been that good, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So, I mean, I could see that. Like maybe the Bills try to pick up where they left off with Ray Davis and try to get James Cook going. But I just feel like watching the Seahawks minimally here, like I think the best game to go off of is that Detroit game on Monday night when I could actually watch the Seahawks. And it just seemed like they were susceptible to giving up big plays in the air. And especially with that banged up secondary, this might be the week where you try to exploit that and try to, ramp Cooper up a little bit more. And if you can get those younger DBs to worry about Amari Cooper, then you have Keon Coleman, right? Then you have Dalton Kincaid to worry about. Then you have Khalil Shakir to worry about. Maybe Curtis Samuel, if he plays, we'll see what happens there. Dawson Knox, don't want to forget about him. So I feel like as much as the Bills maybe want to run on this Seattle defense, maybe they just want to say, hey, let's keep it in Josh Allen's hands because we think that we can get big 15, 20, 25-yard chunk plays through the air.
Yeah. And more inside their DBs. Like obviously if Reek Wallen's back, that's going to give him a little bit boost. He practiced today. So without him, they're a complete mess. With him, they actually at least have a corner one because safety play, Julian Love's been good. So Julian Love and Reek Wallen can equal like an okay backfield, but now you're rolling in Kobe Bryant, who's not good, Nehemiah Pritchard, who's hurt. So both of them, combo hasn't been good. Kayvon Wallace, when he comes in, hasn't been good at all. And then if Pritchard is out and can't play, who's already been a struggle, their normal starting corner, Trey Brown, who's also hurt. I straight up don't even know. Artie Burns is a guy that they signed who's also on the IR. I straight up don't know who their corner two is against the Bills. So the Bills will have to attack. It could be D. Williams, Faion Hicks from their practice squad. Those are the only guys that have any snaps. I have no idea who the Seahawks corner two will be in this game. And then above that corner two, you're talking about Kobe Bryant and Kayvon Wallace, depending on who's going to take the majority of the snaps there. From the looks at it right now, I would think it's Kobe Bryant who played the majority of the snaps in a winning effort last week. He got his first real game action at free safety. So now you're talking about Kobe Bryant and Faion Hicks or D. Williams. There's a complete side of the field that is overly attackable. Whoever Reek Wallen decides to match up with will be able to compete. And then wherever Julian Love is, but half of their backfield is going to be a challenge with new linebackers in there and new positions for Terrell Dodson, totally new player in Ernest Jones. On the other side, you have an edge that's struggling, like an edge defender in a 3-4. We'll see. They probably take him off a lot for Witherspoon, but still a guy that plays a good amount of snaps. And Draymond Jones, 307 snaps, hasn't really been good at anything this season. So there's going to be a side of the field that's very, very attackable, just like the offensive line on the other side. The right side is very, very attackable. The same thing for the Seattle defense, very attackable. If for some reason Reek Wallen can't go, I just think you got to go out and throw the ball all over the yard. If Reek Wallen plays, obviously that'll tamper that a little bit as he'll be able to match up well against either Keon Coleman or Amari Cooper. But there's going to be winnable matchups for one or the other boundary corners, because obviously you're going to have Witherspoon on Khalil Shakir, but you have a very winnable matchup. Can Terrell Dodson cover Dalton Kincaid? I don't think so. So you're going to have a winnable matchup there, and then you're going to have a winnable matchup at really Keon Coleman. Could be a Keon Coleman game, unless they decide to cover him with Reek Wallen and leaving Cooper on his own against a corner that hasn't played much. So either they're starting a brand new corner for the first time, or they're going to be playing Trey Brown, who isn't very good in my opinion, or even worse, Nehemiah Pritchett, who has not had a good start to the year either. So they definitely have some issues at the wide cornerback spot. Pritchett got his first real action in week 7, wasn't good in it. Trey Brown is generally going to be their starting corner. If he plays okay, whatever, he's not that good. There's going to be some winnable matchups across the field from the Bills' perspective. With that being said, Kevin, putting it all together, what are your final thoughts on how to attack this Seattle? What do you want the Bills to do? Come out and do? Do you want them to be physical and run the ball, or do you want to attack which perceives to be half of the field on defense, which looks weaker? They can get after the quarterback. They do have that pressure package, a good D line, but some definite holes in the second and third levels.
Well, I think the Bills have a multitude of ways that they can attack this defense. Now, I'm not sure if we've mentioned this already, but Seattle is 19th in scoring defense. They're giving up more than 23 points per game. And as we mentioned, they are susceptible to giving up those big plays. And I keep going back to that Monday night game in Detroit. They gave up 42 points to the Lions. The Lions almost had 400 total yards of offense. Jared Goff was 18 of 18 for 292 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs had 14 carries for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. David Montgomery had 40 yards and a touchdown. So Goff was able to carve up their pass defense, and Detroit still had their way on the ground. So I feel like the Bills can attack them either way. For the reasons that we laid out, I feel like you would want to attack that weakened secondary with Josh Allen. And the more Amari Cooper gets acclimated and the more everyone else settles into those roles, like Keon Coleman, I feel like you would want to throw. But looking at the weather forecast in Seattle, the early forecast is 56 degrees with an 80% chance of rain. So weather could also be a factor, and maybe the Bills are going to want to establish a line of scrimmage and get James Cook and Ray Davis going. And then if it clears up later on in the game, that's when you can open it up with Josh Allen's arm.
Yeah, I think the way to go is to attack that to me, a really good pressure front, a bad, like overall, like if you look through their sacks, pretty good overall sack totals out of Seattle right now, 8th in the league at 20, not ground shattering, but certainly top of the league. The Bills have 19, for, good for tied for 9th. In the league. So Seattle's tied with the Packers for 20 for being 7th in the league, and the Bills, Lions, Eagles, Commanders are right below it at 19. So they're all tied there. So they can get after it a little bit. Terrell Dotson has 2 sacks for what it's worth. So that's pretty funny. But their main, realistically, their main sack guys, Derek Hall, 5 sacks in the year, Boye Mafe with 4 sacks. So, obviously, and then you got Leonard Williams at 2.5 and Terrell Dotson at 2. So those are the main guys that you're looking at. So I want to attack that front. I want to attack them in the running game. If there is going to be a little bit of elements, let's play some Ray Davis. Let's play some James Cook. Let's establish the run the best of the Bills can. And then they're going to have issues at the corner spot. To me, I think you attack it with what you can do with what you saw in the second half of Keon Coleman and Amari Cooper. Look, like we talked about the Bills not beating a winning opponent. If the Bills win this week, it's another 500 team though. That team would go to 4-4. And you could still say the Bills haven't beat a winning opponent, but by all metrics, it'd be a 4-4 team, but it'd be a good 4-4 team. You're talking about 15th in the league on defense, and we talked about 10th in the league on offense. Their DVOA is in 12th overall. So you're talking about a wild card team or better in the NFC. So ultimately, I don't want to hear that they can't beat winning teams because this is a team that is borderline, depending on the metric, 10-12 and a lot of different things. If you're only talking about the Chiefs and Ravens, that's one thing, but the Seahawks team is maybe not tier 2 with the Bills and Texans, and a couple others, like maybe the Vikings and Packers, but they're right there, borderline in that next tier of team that can make a. This is a playoff team. The Seattle Seahawks are a playoff team. If they get there, I think they will. I mean, obviously anything could happen and they just miss out. But it's a playoff team, whether they the 4 seed or whether they end up being 3 or 4 seed or whether they end up being the 6 or 7. This is a playoff team from 3 to the 7 range in the NFC. It's a winning team. This is a team that was in the playoffs. This is a team that has some good tradition and is a good win on the road. Like, I don't want to hear about like them beating bad opponents. This isn't a freebie. This isn't the Titans or Jags. This is a tough opponent. I don't care if they'll drop to 4-4. Seattle should, by all accounts, end in double-digit 10. I mean, I have them at 10-7. So this is going to be a team that still going to end the year well. They have a stretch of the Rams, 49ers, Cardinals, Jets, Cardinals. So they're going to need to rack up some wins, especially if they start 4-4. But it starts against the Bills, and the Bills are going to get a hard-fought game, and it would be a hard-fought victory. So that's keys to the game. Kevin, let's talk about score predictions. What do you think that happens in this football game? And then we're going to get into trade targets in a little bit after the score predictions.
I think this, just talking about it and thinking about that weather forecast, I'm getting flashbacks to the Dallas game last year because the Bills proved that they could have this type of game. I think that we did give Geno a lot of credit tonight, and I don't want to take that away now in these score predictions and just be a homer and be like, oh, go Bills, we're going to win. So I think that it will be competitive. It will be a tough game. And I think that maybe some of these numbers don't do the Seahawks justice for how good they can be, because I feel like a lot of these times it's like, oh, they have the 28th rushing offense, and then Kenneth Walker comes out and runs for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, right? So I don't want to get too confident, but I do like the Bills offense here to win in either the passing game or the rushing game. I think the Seahawks can still do some things. So I don't think it's going to be like this past weekend against the Titans where it's 34-10. I'm going to take Buffalo 37-24.
37-24. Okay. So you got some scoring going on.
Yeah.
You definitely have some scoring going on in this game. Like if you look at the total numbers by the numbers, Bills ESPN predictor 64% to the Seahawks 36%. But by the numbers, the Bills are favored by 3, over under of 46. So you have the over, right? Did you say 37-23?
37-24.
37. Okay. Yeah. Still the over.
That's, like 60 if I'm doing my math right? Or
61 points.
61. Yeah.
Yeah. That's. I think the weather could play a role in that, but I see where you're going with it being like the Cowboys game. I could see that being an outcome for sure. As you look at, I think there's plus matchups on the field without DK Metcalf. I definitely in the right side of the line, some of the issues they have on defense. I definitely think it skews to the Bills, but we've seen the Bills be slow. They're 2-2 on the road. Nice division road games, but they've struggled in their other 2 good opponent games against their road schedule is very hard this year. Their division games plus the Texans, Ravens, Seahawks. I mean, it's not the easiest road schedule. Sometimes you get a cake road schedule and maybe a little bit harder of a home schedule. The Colts is kind of similar to the Seahawks team, maybe a stretch worse, but you're going to see them next on the road. So it isn't really that easy of a road stretch, even if the Colts lost to the Jaguars. I still kind of consider them, and they barely beat the Titans, but I still consider them to be a challenging environment, and we'll get into that in a few weeks. And then obviously the Lions on the road too. So it's a tough road stretch. The Bills are going to need to run at least a couple tough road games, Seattle and the Colts, the middle of the strength, you would say, right, maybe 4 and 5 of the hardest road games. The Bills need to clean that side of it up, especially if they're not going to take care of their probably 2 of the top 3, Ravens 1, Lions 2, probably Houston 3. So they've already lost a couple of those top road opponents. So I think the Bills do pull this one out to prove that, look, we can still beat teams on the road. But ultimately, it's probably going to be one of those 1-score games. The Bills have been pretty decent in 1-score games lately. The Arizona win, Texans loss, Jets win. So they're 2-1 in 1-score games. I think it's going to be a 1-score game. I got 27-23, Buffalo hitting 50, hitting just over the over. But I wouldn't be shocked if the weather hits another bite into that. But I got 27-23 Buffalo in this game. So, we'll see what happens. But it's definitely going to be a chance for the Bills to go to 6-2, be in a commanding position. Hopefully, get some help from the Patriots just for fun to take a bite into the Jets a little bit. That would be quite funny. And then maybe Arizona does a little bit of work, putting down the Dolphins, and the Bills could be in commanding position, basically with the division on the line for the Dolphins next week. Would be kind of a funny scenario where really you're looking at being 4.5 games plus the tiebreaker to the Bills if they win. That is an absurd scenario. I know everyone claims the Dolphins were in that same scenario last year. They weren't, because the Bills had already beaten them early in the year. Plus they had a looming Week 18 game. It's just I never thought that was overly in their hands and a tougher finish to the season. The Bills aren't going to have a lot of those issues, especially if they hold the tiebreaker. The team's going to have to pass them, which makes it virtually impossible. So it's going to be a very good, and you got Roy Collins saying 34-24. So kind of a similar to mine-ish, a little bit toward your Bills high-end score. So it's going to be very interesting. But lastly here for the last segment of the day, for a few minutes, we talked about it a little bit off the stretch. Let's talk about some trade targets. What more could the Bills do to up this roster? Let's say they get a win and they're competitive with the rest of the AFC. You're talking Ravens, Texans, Chiefs, Bills, Steelers 5. I mean 6, maybe even the Bengals right now, even though they started so slow. And then the 7th could go to anyone, could go to one of those AFC East teams, could go to the Colts or Broncos. Who really cares who gets that 7th seed? But for the most part, it's the 4 division winners at the top, with the Steelers kind of there, maybe sitting in the 5 seed. Going to give the 4 seed a little bit of run, whether it's the Bills again in the playoffs at home or possibly the Texans in the 4 seed. But it's going to look something like that, a tough 4-5 game against the Steelers in the first round of the wild card. But Kevin, what do the Bills need to do? Give me a position first, in your opinion. We don't have to have exact names. We'll pick names from there. If you could upgrade one more position on the Bills roster, which position is it?
I think they could do a multitude of things here. I think they could add to the wide receiver room. I think they could add an offensive lineman, specifically a tackle, with Grable potentially being out for the year. You could always add an edge rusher, but I think it'll help once Vaughn comes back after this week. And I like that they have Javon Solomon. Juwan Smoot's playing really well. So I think they have some pieces there. I keep coming back to the safety position, though, because I'm still not satisfied. I think DeMar is solid, but I don't know if he's going to be the one to take us over the top in the playoffs. I'm still waiting to see on Cole Bishop. I think the Bills are kind of slow playing it. He's not ready because, we saw during the Texans game, you could see that he's not ready. So DeMar is a placeholder, right? I think Taylor Rapp is established as safety 1. And right now it's DeMar until Bishop is ready. But would you want to pull the Band-Aid off on that and go get a different placeholder until Bishop is ready? And by that, I mean, you go out and acquire someone at the deadline to take over for DeMar. You demote DeMar, and then you get to the end of the year and say, okay, you played really well. We're going to give you another contract. Or, you know what? Thanks for everything. But now Cole Bishop's ready for his sophomore season. So I feel like safety is the one position that they could potentially upgrade here, as the deadline is 2 weeks away.
Yeah, like safety is tough for me because I really think they could replace DeMar and obviously the talent on the field, and maybe they will end up doing it. But it's super tough because I think that they're going to run a roll DeMar, and then just like we just talked about a defensive end with, you replace it off Solomon and Vaughn coming back. Give us like a similar scenario where if they wanted to make a move at safety, they could go Edwards. Like, he is the vet in the room already. He'd be like a candidate you would possibly trade for if he was on another roster. And then you have the young player too in Cole Bishop. So you could go either way, and they have not wanted to go either. So that's why I always go back to, if there's a top end safety that can be had with them eating the salary and not that big of a pick, a 4th round pick going back, of course. But that could probably happen at literally any position on the roster, beside like maybe running back or a couple others, like tight end. Other than that, like, they could certainly make a move at safety or any other position. But I'm struggling with, if they wanted to replace DeMar, the 2 in-house candidates are ready. They don't want to do it with them. It's struggling that they would want to put one of McDermott's favorite position from an outsourced candidate. It's tough for me to think that they'll go say. I agree, though. Safety would be where I would pick. I just don't think the Bills will pick safety. So that's kind of how I think that in a vacuum, safety is the room I would replace for sure. Like, no doubt about it.
And this is
the Bills
this is
disagree.
a good question, because like I don't have an answer. The closest thing that I can come up with is those injuries in the offseason and in the summer set him back to the point where he was not able to get up to speed to DeMar Hamlin's level. Now, some people might say, well, how hard is it to get to Hamlin's level? Because you would like to think that Edwards has the smarts and the athletics to get back to that level and then some, right? Because the bar isn't that high. This isn't like a Justin Simmons. So, by the way, is he still a free agent?
No, he's in Atlanta.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Not that I was going to think about going for Justin Simmons, but it just popped into my mind. I saw people were talking about Micah Hyde today, too. I don't think that's going to be the move. Like, if they were going to do something like that, I feel like they already would have, right? Like, Micah probably would have came back already, or maybe they would have gone after Justin Simmons. Or in terms of Mike Edwards, if they really wanted to shake up from DeMar, then they probably would have had Edwards in already. So that's why I could see this both ways, where it's like maybe they just flat out don't do anything, and you still have Edwards sitting there on the bench if you need something. But I'm trying to look at teams who are going to be in sell mode, because sure, you might be able to pluck a player off of a winning team if it's just a bad situation. But in terms of Mike Edwards, you could also include him, because if it's just not working and he's not grasping the playbook, maybe it's better to just say, let's do a player for player trade like we saw today with Ernest Jones and Jerome Baker. Maybe you throw a draft pick in there. And I'm looking at the Cleveland Browns. What do you think about acquiring Grant Delpit or Rodney McLeod, and then including Edwards in on that and potentially a draft pick? Would you be interested in either of those guys? Because, I mean, they could potentially be on the block.
Yeah, what's funny about Cleveland is, like, I always say this, like, Cleveland has a bunch of players, like, seriously, that I would pick. But at some point, like, is Cleveland going to continue to trade with us, like, as like a farm team? Like, it's tough for me to think that they'll continue to go back to the well to make trades like that. It's tougher for me to assume that, like, oh, let's just go to Cleveland to see what happens. Like, from that, like, I like Grant Delpit, so Grant Delpit could make sense. Like, the safety one is hard because I don't know who the Bills would deem to be better than DeMar for this defense. So it's tough for me to actually pick a exact player on the Bills roster or on another roster to replace DeMar when there's two on the roster now that they don't think is going to be replacing to the Bills roster. The problem with Delpit was that, you know, he's already under a contract 3 for $36. They just signed him to that after his rookie deal. It's a fairly decent deal, 3 for $36, but the Bills are in position to, like, make them eat some of it. I don't think they're going to eat all that money for, like, a Grant Delpit. Like, it's different with Cooper. Like, he's a younger player. He probably doesn't match the mold of somebody that Cleveland would trade. So I think you can rule him out in terms of that. Did you say Rodney McLeod next?
Yeah. Because he's on a cheap 1-year deal, right?
Yeah, he'd be a guy that they could go after, but he's also one that I think wouldn't be a different upgrade to DeMar.
I mean, that's kind of just Mike Edwards, right? Like that.
Right.
That's essentially a toss-up where if Edwards, and here's where it comes down to, like, us not being able to know what's going on behind closed doors. Because if Edwards is just so much of a headache where they can't relate to each other, right? Like, not that he's uncoachable, but if he just doesn't fit the system, then that's the case where you would just do a player for player swap and say, okay, we're going to give you to a new team, new situation. We're going to get someone of your caliber to literally just come in and swap in as that fourth safety. So maybe in that case, he wouldn't be, you know, supplanting DeMar Hamlin, but he would just literally take over for Edwards as that backup safety who might be getting scratched, might get a roster spot, but maybe he's not going to be getting that many of the snaps.
Yeah, and then you're just making moves to make moves. I mean, they have Ronnie Hickman, who they like, a nice-looking young safety from Ohio State last year. So they could definitely move one of these safeties. I just think Hickman and Delpit are probably the way they're going to go. I just don't think McLeod offers anything over Mike Edwards. It doesn't make too much sense. If you stay on this roster just real quick, you have Zadarius Smith, a guy I tweeted, not going to cost you any money. He's a good pass rusher. Has been successful pass rushing. Reminds me of like a Leonard Floyd. He's been pretty good this season. You know, is always going to get you around that same Leonard Floyd level of sacks. A guy that wouldn't cost you too much money. He makes a lot of sense because you can plug and play him right at the defensive end, and it would probably just cost you Casey Toohill in terms of like who you're cutting. So I just think that ultimately you could still keep Solomon in his role, but for him to come in, you know, that's definitely going to be somebody that I immediately point to. Could they upgrade defensive tackle? I think we talked about Carter enough on the show. Austin Johnson does his thing as the third, fourth defensive tackle. They like their starters. Sure, I think the Bills could get a little bit more production out of DT. I just don't see them going out and it being the position group. But I could always see them adding a pass rusher to come in and rush the passer like Leonard Floyd style. So it just always makes sense that whether we think it's the number one need or not, it is one that what's the number one thing you need to do is get Joe Burrow to the ground in the wild card round or Mahomes and Lamar in the divisional or conference championships. So, you know, seeing Joe Burrow in the first round, which is a thing for somebody, either Houston, Buffalo, or Baltimore, maybe even the Chiefs. Somebody's going to have to see Joe Burrow in the wild card round because I think he's going to get the 6 or 7 spot. So it's not going to be fun. It's going to be different than when you're seeing these Mason Rudolphs or Skylar Thompsons or Mac Jones in these 6-7 games. you're going to get a legitimate team that, yes, they have issues on defense. Like the Cincinnati defense stinks. It's not the same one that we've seen in the past. However, that offense is just as good as it's always been for the most part. It's, Joe Burrow's playing good football. It's definitely not one you're excited about playing in the wild card round. It's not the same Lou Anarumo for sure, which is what won them playoff games historically, not Joe Burrow. But Joe Burrow in the wild card round is not going to be fun. I think the Bills could want to deploy, make sure they have as many pass rushers, assuming you don't know who's going to be healthy. You're getting Milano back. Bernard's hopefully healthy. Dorian's there. You have already Nicholas Morrow, who you use. You have Spector, who you like. You have two younger guys in Olafosio and Joe Andreessen. They're not going to do anything at linebacker. Like they just, with Milano kind of being that acquisition in December, as much as linebacker could be in play, they've already upgraded that room to feel comfortable, hopefully January 1st. So I can't see linebacker. I can't see DT. Corner doesn't need anybody. Safety is going to be tough for me to assume that's going to be the room, but it does make the most sense to replace DeMar. Will the Bills actually do it? Maybe they will. Maybe they'll feel like there's an external guy out there who can be the upgrade difference between the three safeties right now with DeMar, Cole Bishop, and Mike Edwards. So sure, there's still a conceivable chance. I just think pass rusher is the most seamless addition to stopping Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud come playoffs, and Mahomes.
Someone mentioned Andre Cisco early in the show. Do you think he could be a potential target? And then I'm looking at some different depth charts here, and I feel like I've heard this name floated around at least maybe over the summer and going into the season. Nick Scott with the Panthers. Do you think that could be an option?
Yeah, I mean, I like Cisco. He's been a guy that was really good last year during their winning stretch that Jacksonville had. He's definitely, he's going to be a free agent. I don't think that Jacksonville has any interest in having him on their roster. He hasn't played great football this year. He was really good last year. I think he was a top 30 safety last year based on a few metrics. Once again, though, he doesn't jump out to be somebody that would replace Mike Edwards and DeMar Hamlin. He is probably a tick better than both, but he's not that much better. He's a rental. Like, I just would probably need a top 25 safety for me to feel like the Bills will actually move from not only DeMar Hamlin, but feel the need to get rid of Edwards and then still not want to play Cole Bishop. So I think it needs to be a top. He's fringe. And then Nick Scott, he's just not good enough. So I wouldn't mind rostering him. But he's not a guy that would put a dent in that current 4-man rotation that they operate with. Once again, he'd be similar to that McLeod being a guy that could come in if you had safety injuries for sure, but he's not going to be a guy that I would see that the Bills would replace one of those jerseys on game day with. I don't necessarily think that that's the way they would go, because otherwise they already said that Mike Edwards missed too much time. So now they're going to bring in a guy like Nick Scott to play and then try to claim Edwards missed too much time. But now you're bringing in a guy off the street that you're claiming he's going to know the defense better. Like, that's realistically why, to me, and Nick Scott's not playing very good this year in general either. But that's why, to me, like, the laughs about Micah Hyde make a little bit of sense, because he could come in and know the defense right away, and he knows what to do, knows how to handle it. So that's a little different of a scenario, because he knows what to do in every situation, limited or not. So that's what is a little bit interesting. But I think they're now at the stage, if they were going to go Micah Hyde, what are you waiting for November? Why not October? What November 1st is Micah Hyde the reason? You don't have an injury there. I just don't know. They would have already gone Micah Hyde if that's the way that they were going to go. At least someone on the practice squad even. It doesn't make any sense for Micah Hyde to just be the November 1st guy without an injury. They would have already gone Micah Hyde if they thought he was better than DeMar, Cole, or Mike Edwards. And they clearly don't. And they don't have an injury there. So I can't see Micah Hyde being the answer. Safety needs to be a top 25 guy. Otherwise, they're just going to hang on to the three that they have right now competing for that one spot. I just don't see safety being the position. Unless it's going to be a guy like you mentioned to be the fourth safety. I mean, that's just nickel diming your roster. So if they want to do that, they could, but we're talking about actually improving the roster. And for me to do that isn't nickel diming. It's going after Budda Baker. They would need to eat some salary. I don't think that they will. but he would have to be like a top 25 guy. Otherwise, I don't think safety's a move. Pass rusher's the more seamless move, and they can always integrate a receiver into this offense, especially with what's going on with Curtis Samuel. You've already let MVS go. They could always look at one of these receivers that seem to be plentiful for the first time ever. You got Cooper Kupp, you got Hopkins to go into KC, you got Cooper Kupp available, you have Christian Kirk. I mean, you just have names of players that generally like in a pretty active October, realistically. Yeah. So more like an NBA or NHL than the NFL. So as some of these receivers continue to come out, like at some point, Rapp and DeMar have almost similar PFF grades, legit middle of the pack for both. Yeah, I mean, for the Bills to want to replace either or, and Rapp's not going to get replaced. For the Bills to want to replace DeMar, I still think it's got to be a top 30 guy. Like, I just don't think they're going to make that chance to swap one of them out right now for a guy that's similar-ish. And then I have to learn the defense. That's a whole argument against Mike Edwards. So that's what's challenging to me right now. And then Cole Bishop didn't play great in his 132 snaps, had a few moments in the backups. But really in his snaps, he hasn't been very good either. Cam Lewis has struggled in stretches in his nickel dime role that he's played. Really the best player of all those backups right now has been Ingram, has flashed a little bit. But as far as, those two go, like, the Bills could upgrade safety per the PFF metrics we just saw on the screen. They're 47th and 48th. I think a top 30 guy needs to come in to replace safety, and I hope the Bills are seriously looking into seeing if a guy can come in day one and be a difference maker at safety, because I think they need it. Otherwise, it's pass rusher or it's one of these plentiful receivers that are still on the market that the Bills could plug right in, hopefully like Cooper, and be effective like Christian Kirk or Cooper Kupp or something along those lines. I don't think receivers ever end. I don't think Brandon Beane's done. I think that safety, DN, receiver.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think tonight was a good start, a good baseline, just throwing some names and some teams out there. Because as I alluded to, the key is finding teams who are probably just going to be sellers, right? Like teams with losing records, like the Browns, the Panthers, the Jaguars. I mean, maybe the Jaguars have a little bit of life, but you want to go after teams that you think aren't going anywhere and are just going to try to build for next year. So I guess that being said, if you guys find any potential trade targets, let us know, because we'll have a full episode next, maybe not full episode, because we'll be talking about the Dolphins. That'll be a big show for the Dolphins, but we're definitely going to have to fire up this conversation again next week. So, let us know, come prepared. Let us know if you have any new trade targets, maybe some guys that we haven't mentioned yet.
On those lines too, the trade deadline's only 13 days away, right after the Dolphins game before. So it's basically right after the Dolphins into the next Tuesday, November 5th, if there's not enough going on that day. You also have the NFL trade deadline. So there's going to be so much going on that it's just going to be a crazy, crazy week in across everything. So
why do they have to put the trade deadline and election?
I don't think they even noticed or realized, or like maybe even Monday the 4th, like Monday the 4th even, or giving it another, like Monday the 4th is probably the solution there.
Sensory overload. That's what it is. Too much going on.
So 13 days away. So like you said, the next show will be 6 days away. So we'll break down some more. And then the next show, if there's any moves, we'll have them broken down for you in 2 weeks from today. And any of those moves that happen same day. It's going to be tough going live the day of the November 5th. I don't know how anyone's going to manage all this stuff going on across the country on that day. So we'll see what happens, but I would love to be active and live on that day. But we don't want to interrupt actual USA based stuff going on in the country that day either. So it's going to be a challenge to manage that. I mean, it's like you said, why would you pick the 5th? Well, at least go the 4th. But yeah, that's going to be
day after on Wednesday.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't make, I mean, you're hopefully trying to get the player in to play that week. So that's why I would just made it Monday, after. I think they made it Tuesday because there's still Monday Night Football. There's still teams playing week 9, finishing up week 9. And then like it's a disadvantage if a couple of Monday Night Football teams I get it kind of why you would pick Tuesday. But then if you pick Wednesday, it's too short of a week. But then make your trade on Tuesday then if you're really worried about playing that player that week. But yeah, Wednesday probably would have made the most sense for the trade deadline. But That's going to do it from the Going Deep Buffalo show. We really appreciate everybody. An hour and 40 minutes on the button being here with us, to our show sponsors, the Summit Center and Dave Dengler and Larson Timko Funeral Home. We really appreciate you. And all of our, we have some great seasonal sponsors at times. So we really appreciate everybody for backing us, and Monster Energy as well on the Built-in Buffalo Network. But I'm Kevin. That's Kevin. We appreciate you tuning in with us when there's so much other content on Wednesdays. So thank you so much. And we'll be back at you. You can follow us everywhere that you see us, at Kevin Massare, at Kevin_Siracuse. You can see us across all of our takes and all of our ideas across X. Catch us around there. So see you guys next week. Maybe some more trade deadlines topic, maybe a 6-2 roster, maybe talking about putting a hatchet in the Dolphins. So much going on over the next 13 days, and we're glad to be here with you. But we'll catch you here next week.